There we go, and right on time. So, hi everybody. Thanks for coming. This is really loud. Too high?
A little hot. Just turn it down.
How's that? Better. Good. Thank you. Okay. So thanks for coming. Really happy to see this is a full room. I do different type of sessions when I come to these conferences. The last one I did was more theoretical, architecture, planning, thinking ahead. Actually had no demo in it whatsoever. This one, it's all demo, and this is where I prefer to be because it's just command line, bunch of geeks hanging out, chatting about stuff. That's the kind of talk that I like to deliver. So I'm really happy to see a full room. So my name is Kirk Munro, for you who don't know me. I go by the handle Poshaholic if you're looking for me on Twitter or poshaholic@gmail.com or any other Poshaholic properties that are out there. That's a good way to find me. Make sure you do it with Posh-oholic. There is Posh-aholic, which has a lot to do with fashion and things I don't care anything about. But yeah, so that's how you can get a hold of me. And I came here with this one, so I was really happy they accepted it because I've been working with PowerShell for 12 years, and give or take a bit. And there's just lots of things. So when I started working with PowerShell, you probably all know you can use PowerShell to learn PowerShell. And so I decided from day one with PowerShell version 1 back in 2006 that I was going to just basically dog food it, not read any documentation, just go through and figure out from the language how I can interrogate the language, and then from that uncover, start just peeling back the onion and figure out how it works. It was much easier back then. There were 129 commandlets compared with today we have thousands of commandlets, but it was a great way to get started, and I still recommend it for newcomers, that kind of approach, because you can really learn a lot about the language by interrogating the language with itself. And so through that process, that helped me uncover a lot of the inside tricks and secrets and things that are some people might not discover. And being curious, I like to push things. And so I would take some of that and I would push it and see what I could do with the language. And so for 5 years, I used to do management of a product called PowerGUI. How many people know PowerGUI? Yay. OK. I even have a cool sticker on my laptop, and I had a few of them that I gave away earlier this week. But anyway, so PowerGUI was the PowerShell script editor. And while working on that product team, I just decided I wanted to really push the language and figure out what I could make it do that it wasn't necessarily intended to do. And so for 5 years, I did that, just hardcore PowerShell. And then later on, after that, I started hitting walls. And so I figured I'd push the language pretty much as far as I could, and then I just switched over and started doing things in C#. And I felt like I took the handcuffs and I just ripped them right off, because there's things you can do in the world of C# that with PowerShell and binary commandlets and just stuff that's not necessarily apparent in regular PowerShell itself that you can't do there. It's just either not possible or not performant enough. And I mean, not just about raw performance of the commandlets, but literally solutions that you could not implement as PowerShell commands because they're so intrinsic to how the language works, it would slow everything down and you wouldn't use it. Versus doing it in C#, I can push in cool solutions that are more like a shim that kind of plug into the right spot and do cool things without impacting performance. And so that's just kind of where my progression went over time. So yeah, so I do a lot of work with C# too. And so this presentation is kind of a culmination of all of that effort and pulling out certain highlights on things just to show some of the things I've done and talk about it with you guys and see where the discussion goes, talk about some future stuff that I work on today, because now with PowerShell being open source, I mean, I took the handcuffs off with C#, and now they gave me the product. And it's like, yay. So now I'm doing all sorts of really cool things that I can do actually in the core language itself. So it's really exciting and fun to see that progression and see how that's gone through all these years. So that's pretty much it for the slide deck, other than the slide deck saying thank you. The rest of it's all demos. And so I'm going to flip over to Visual Studio Code and close my slides. Where's my slide deck? And there we go. And so how is that font size in the back of the room? We good? OK, great. So let me flip over to the first. Here we go. So something old. So I wanted to show this because it was a fun project that I did years ago, more when I was on the PowerShell side of the fence and not quite so much in getting into C# yet. And there's lots of instances. I mean, this predates open source PowerShell, and so we're in a different world today, but still it's a fun solution to highlight what you can do with proxy functions. So I would use commands, and I would find that's great, but it didn't quite do what I wanted to, and I wish I could just shim it. Because a lot of the time, solutions I look for are things that I can just basically just stick in a very, very thin layer, and from the end user perspective, they don't have to change anything or relearn anything new other than maybe some extensions that they've added, but they're still using the same commands and the same functionality and the same syntax that they know and love. And so I made this project, this module called PSPX, which is PowerShell Proxy Functions. And so I hadn't really looked at it in years, except for very recently when I thought I should talk about it here. And all I did was blow some dust off of it and comment some things out that made it not work in PowerShell Core, and now it works in PowerShell Core. And so let me just run that to import my module. And so the module, it really just sets up a proxy layer for PowerShell that allows you to do some interesting things with proxy functions. Who here doesn't know what a proxy function is? OK, so a proxy function is basically it's basically a shim. I mean, you think about a proxy server as being the server that you're going to connect to before you actually get in and to the real server behind the scenes. So the proxy function is just basically a shim that sits on top of an existing function. It can have the same name, so it can be a very transparent shim. So I can make a proxy for any command and use that exact same command name and extend that command to do interesting things that the command doesn't do today. Or I can make a proxy for an existing command, give it a totally different command name, in which case I'm kind of borrowing that functionality and then do extensions and interesting things under a different command name. But the point is I want to leverage work that's already done, and I want to then take that and do more. And so I'm just going to show here really quick so the command syntax for export CSV that you get out of the box, right? So this is, you get two parameter sets, and it's got the handful of parameters up there, and that's great. But one thing I've always felt was missing, and actually when I went and looked at this, I was surprised it's still missing today, which makes me think I should put it in a PR. So export CSV does not have dash property. And I mean, if I want to export data, and I'm pipelining it, and so I have this collection of data I've gone and gotten, and I want to send it to a CSV file, I might not want all the properties. And sure, I can throw in there select object and pick the ones that I want that way, and then export. But all those extra steps and some of those things I feel like just make sense to have it in as a regular parameter on these guys. So with that in mind, let me just open up really quick here. So this syntax at the top is going to look a little weird. This is leveraging PSPX, the module I wrote. And so there's an alias called fixit, which behind the scenes maps to new-proxy command. So I picked fixit because usually these ideas come from a command's not quite working the way I want it to, and so I want to fix it. And so what this does is this takes in the command name that I want to change, and then as some parameters, I can give it these property bags. And if I was to do this today, I might make this a little bit prettier. But for anyway, because this is an older solution that I just brought forward, this is how it works. So I can take these property bags, and so the first one says that I want to add a parameter name called property. It's going to have a type of system object and be an array. And as a pre-process step, when I get my data, I want to select object-property on it. So I'm basically just saying, like, I said I can take a data set, pipe to select object-property, and then I can go and send that to export CSV. Here I'm saying, well, I want export CSV to have property, and I want it to be smart enough to internally call select object-property on the data that I give it, and then export it to the CSV. And there's another one there for invoke, which currently doesn't work on PowerShell Core, and so I'll just have to look at that one. But anyway, that was the idea behind there, was that if I export file to a CSV, or data to a CSV, I might want to see it right away and just have it show up with dash invoke. So these kind of things, like there's pre-process, and there's also post-process, and there's before pipeline, and there's after pipeline. And so I kind of basically took if you picture a pipeline, a stage of commands, the four places that I might want to do things. I might want to do it before I call my pipeline, after my pipeline's all done, before the stage in the pipeline as I'm passing stuff through, or afterwards. And so there's kind of 4 different injection points, and that's where I kind of like figure these shims out and plug this stuff in to make it work. And so that's neat, and that just creates an advanced function behind the scenes. And so if I run it, which I think I'm doing in the other file, yeah, so I'll run that script. And so now, if I look at the syntax for export CSV, I'll bring this up. Right there. Yeah, so it's down here. So now here you can see I now have export CSV as a command. And here is dash property, which takes an object array. And there's also the invoke parameter. And so it just through, without me having to think about, I want to create the function, and I want to set up the command binding, and I want to copy all these parameters that are already existing, and all of that stuff, without having to think about that, this little solution allows me to basically skip a lot of the wrapping glue and just kind of say, yeah, I want a shim, and this is how I want my shim to plug in. And so that's what PowerShell proxy function, the module, does. And of course, now that I have it, I can actually run it. And so I can pass in the file name and the properties that I actually want to get, and then go and open that. And there's the list of the ID and the name. So it works. So this is something that I wonder about how useful this is. I mean, proxy functions, the reason I want to show it is because I still use proxy functions a lot today. This particular solution, if stuff is open source, I would tend to just go to the open source and try to do the fixes at that level, one by one. But the point of this is to show the power of proxy functions, because I'm going to talk more about those a little later on in the talk. So now, so that's something old, something new. Let me very quickly see if I can switch over here. Ironic that the old is on my MacBook and the new is on my 2011 beast of a ThinkPad. And, oh, I forgot one part. The joys of this being an old laptop are that I have to use a lot of cables to convert, but I guess these days people are used to that anyway, with dongles and everything else. There. So. Now, plug this guy in. And minimize that. Okay. And now it's working, it's just that it's picking up on, yeah. So I might look over my shoulder here to do this one just because I'm only using this for the one thing, which is fine. So rather than wasting time, I'm just going to change the size of that font so people in my back can see. Font. All right. How is that in the back room? Is that still a little too small? I can make it bigger? It's a little small? OK. Mixed reviews. Let's go it up another size or two. That should be better. Yeah. So this, so because I can now do open source stuff, I've got a PR that's open right now. That's I'm working with the PowerShell team to try to make it happen for PowerShell 7. I think it's a good chance it's going to go in based on the discussion so far. And I want to show it because I think it's a very impactful PR, and I think you guys are going to get a lot of value from it. So I wanted to let you know it's coming. So I've got this function, which all it is testing the PR, and it's really simple. It's just a function that generates an error, because we write lots of those, right? And so I load that function, and if I run it, sure enough, I get an error. But a point of feedback. So I've done, at this conference a number of years now, I've done a talk on debugging because I work with the debugger a lot in PowerShell. And a lot of people, I find, especially in the world of scripting, And a lot of people are intimidated by the idea of a debugger. How many people here use the PowerShell debugger, breakpoints, all that stuff? Well, that's awesome. For the people who aren't, don't be intimidated. Debugging is not a dev-only task. And when you work within PowerShell, it's got a fantastic debugger that makes troubleshooting and finding the problems you have in your scripts much, much, much easier. However, getting to it can be annoying. So, I mean, this is just a very, very simple script that's like 6 lines versus me running a fairly large script, and I run it, and it doesn't work. And a lot of people will go and open up that script file and put in 1, 2, 3, and then run it and see what they get for output. Oh, I got the number 2. OK, great. And then I got an error. And then so tighten up a little bit and figure out where's the actual error coming from and do old school script injection and trying to figure out what's going on. With this PR, you don't have to do that because you can run test PR, error action, break. And so error action break is new, and that's what I'm trying to get in PowerShell 7. And so when I run that, the moment the error happens, on the very line that happens for the first time, it breaks into the debugger on the spot. Doesn't matter if it's terminating, doesn't matter if it's non-terminating. So that's what's coming down the pipe. And that, the reason why I started doing that is because I'm trying to lower the bar for entering the debugger. So you don't have to set breakpoints. You don't have to think about where the things happen. You just know something didn't work. And so you run it again and say, stop where it didn't work. And now that I'm in the debugger, I can do cool things like look at the debugger commands. I can see the call stack. So I can see, what was I doing when I ran this stuff. I can step. I can continue. And I can look at error variables and so on, or just regular variables in my scope and all that stuff. And so that's great. And that's trying to fast track the dev, test, fix cycle for scripting. So that's the something new. And if you guys, once they have the first alpha and once this PR gets in, I'd love feedback on this because if they're doing alphas and they're doing early builds of PowerShell 7 and you guys try it out, I'd love to know what you think. And if there's things you think are missing or places where you find it's not working, please do give it a try because it's it was a fairly complicated change to put in place, and I'd love to just make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. So feedback is appreciated. Now, I don't actually have to exit that. I just need to unplug. All right, done with you. And the only reason why I did that on my Windows box is just because that's where I do most of my development, and so it just made a lot more sense to just show it there since I had the PR already set to go. So let's make sure we're back to business here. Looks good. OK, so that's something new. Now, miscellaneous tricks. How am I doing on time? All right, pretty good. So the one on the top, let me push this off on the side a bit more. There we go. So this line on the top is my favorite one-liner, which is, it's weird to say it's my favorite one-liner, because I mean, you can do some really interesting things with one-liners. But I like it a lot, and I mean, some of you guys might have seen I blogged about it before. I like it because it illustrates how you can do more with less without it getting too complicated. And so, actually, let me just ask people. So looking at the command itself, unless you've read my blog, if you have, don't answer the question. Anybody want to give a crack at what the intent of the one-liner is? Right, and in those variables to have what? Yes, but containing a little further. Yeah, so you're getting to it. Yeah, both. How many and size of folders and files. Because I mean, inside of old command.exe, we just run dir. And at dir, or we run dir-r if we want recursive. And at the very end, we get this nice little summary. How many files, how many folders, how much is my file space of all that stuff. And trying to get that out of PowerShell can be complicated or not. So that's why I really like it, right? Because this is just a straightforward one-liner where I get all the children forcibly, so I get it, hidden files and folders. And then I sum the containers. That gives me how many directories I have, or overall how many files I have. And when I also sum on the length, because you can sum on multiple, that gives me the actual file sizes. And so, I mean, it's a simple thing to show, but I like it because it just demonstrates some of the power of what you can do in PowerShell. And so when I run that, and I look at the results, and then I just make this so you guys can see it, And so, I mean, this is just a small folder, but I can see on the first one, that's my directory. So I've got 12 directories, or sorry, 12 items total. It's a little backwards with how it does the count, but that's just based on the data that comes back. 12 items total. One of them is a directory, 11 of them are files, and the total file size is 110,342. And so it's just really interesting to see from that. One of the reasons why I was calling that out is being able to assign the results of a command to multiple variables. And a lot of people don't realize you can do that and what the benefits are for being able to do that. And so this is one example. And then right below that, I've got another example. So let me show you this participants file. Let's see. So this is just a miscellaneous text file that I could have gotten from any program out there that's generating log data or whatever, right? This is not, I mean, it looks like CSV, but there's no headers. And it's not necessarily structured. The number of properties I have, the number of commas I have might not match up because we get data that comes from strange places. And so when you're dealing with something like that, knowing that you can take arrays, I mean, because that's really, if you look at, it's just broken up a string of commas, so it's like an array. Knowing that you can take arrays and assign them to multiple values at once is interesting. And so I've got this get content, get the contents of the file. For each line item, I want to split the line by comma, so I get an array. And I want the first field to be name, the second to be age, and then everything else goes in address. And so it doesn't matter how many fields after that in address. If I'm dealing with international addresses, if I'm dealing with a whole lot of just different parts of the world using different syntax, more commas for some, less commas for others, doesn't matter. It's not, I don't have to go in and modify my data or do something fancy to go and put quotes around certain portions of it so I can do a CSV processing. I can just tell PowerShell, I'm dealing with a collection and everything after a certain point is arbitrary and just group it all together. And so it's just interesting to know that that sort of thing is available to you. And this is something I've used in a lot of different data processing scenarios where you're dealing with data from different sources. And so if I run it, and so now I can look at the bottom, and sure enough, it allows me to take that data and break it up nice and neat where I've got name, age, and address. Nice and easy to read. So it's just a cool data processing trick that I want to share. Questions so far?
So you can still use all of those variables as separate variables now, here on out in your show?
Well, within, right? So if I go back to the script, within that loop, I can reference those variables and do additional things. So I could take address and I could, convert. Right now, address is being set as an array. I could replace the comma with a new line if I wanted to break it out so it's a different format and store it that way with a different string, right? As part of the processing, referencing those variables. But yeah, I could also build up an array of individual items if I wanted to, and process them afterwards, that sort of thing. But this gives you that kind of flexibility and makes it easier to go from some weird data source. I mean, there's a lot of cool solutions within PowerShell for dealing with weird data sources and how you can just do some extra string processing. And there's been some, I'm trying to think what it's called right now, but there's the smart string conversion logic. There's some commands that let you try to identify certain fields within data. And this is peeling back that to just something really, really simple where you're dealing with a row of, or a collection of data with a lot of commas and how you can break that out. Yes?
On line 2, is it a relationship of the number of variables you have to equal your number of output objects?
That's a great question, so I'm glad you called that out. So the question is, yeah, so when I'm dealing with assigning a value to a common delimited collection of variables, is it based on the number of data items that are coming back? And the same thing for line number 10. And the answer is yes. So when I do directories, files, I'm saying take the first item, put it in directories, the first object that comes back, take the second object, put it into files. For the address part, I get more than 3. So the first one goes in name, second goes in age, and then everything else goes in address. If I had less, so if I was only get back 1 item, files would be null, right? In the first example, because I only get back 1. So it allows you, you're taking a collection of objects coming back and basically just drawing some line saying, yeah, item 1, item 2, everything else, that kind of processing. Other questions? OK, so moving on. Now, I mentioned I work in the debugger a lot. And there's some cool things you can do with the debugger that some people don't know about. How many people know about automatic variables already? OK, so it's not an official thing. It's just a kind of a hack the way it is right now. I'd love to know, actually, if you guys think it would be useful to have automatic variables as an official thing, because that's something that I might be tempted to work at as a PR, because I think there is value in what I call duck typing. You guys know what I mean when I say duck typing? So duck typing is if it looks like a duck and it acts like a duck, then it's a duck, right? So the same thing can apply to a variable. If I have a variable called now, do I have to define that variable, or should I be able to go anywhere in PowerShell and do $now and have that mean, well, now, right? It looks like it's the current date and time, and so why not just make it be the current date and time? And so there's different ways that you could approach that kind of a solution. But yeah, I think it's interesting, the notion of automatic variables. Let's say I'm working with a very specific service, maybe a collection of users on a regular basis, just doing automation against them, or working with them ad hoc just because I'm doing some data processing. Maybe I would want to be able to set up $my users to be this constant collection of users. Whenever I want to go and check the current status of that group because I'm doing a lot of work with them, I could just do $my users, and because I created that kind of an automatic variable, it would go and get the data and always give me the latest. I wouldn't have to keep running a command or keep going back and doing $users equals, go and get, foo user and then pipe to whatever and organize it and all that stuff. I could just do $user and make it be smart. And so that's where I think automatic variables are interesting when you're doing repeated processing, either in a script or ad hoc, and you want to just make sure that whenever you're going reference this guy, it's the latest. Curious on feedback on that one, but anyway, we can think about it and let me know what you guys think. So that first example at the top is setting up an automatic variable via the hack that's available today, which is you create a breakpoint. The breakpoint is a variable breakpoint because there are different types of breakpoints. And so the variable now, which didn't even exist when I created it, this breakpoint, I'm basically saying whenever something tries to read, because the mode's read, the variable now, run this action. And the action is set global now to get date. And I need to use global because this is a hack. Ideally, I would like this to be able to work in any scope and have it work at that point and not have to use global. But because the way this works, you have to use global to make this work. And so this is just saying, yeah, when I reference $now, go and assign global now as get date mode read. And then this next line here is just priming the pump so that I can actually get it once. So I just run this. And then I can come down here and I can just type in $now. And I can get the current time, current date and time. And so that's just a neat little thing. And I'm curious. I really like, so PowerShell borrows a lot of their history from a whole lot of different languages, including Ruby is one of them. And Ruby has interesting things for when a command's not there, or a method's not there, or a property's not there, or a variable's not there. And they have these missing, something missing. And what do I do if it's missing? And I'll get more into missing in a minute, because PowerShell has some of that, but not all of it. And this is one place where I kind of think it'd be fun if they had more. Better error reporting. So 2 functions. Let me just load them up. So test 1 and test 2. The first one is just a basic function that happens to return an error because I'm dividing 1 by 0. And I'm not doing anything for error handling around it, because when we write stuff, a lot of times we don't necessarily think about that. The second one is more structured and has some boilerplate stuff around it, and which I would like to also do as a PR to fix how this works. But today, as a general rule, inside of every process, every begin, process, end block, every function I write, I use this boilerplate chunk of code to make sure that a terminating error is actually terminating. Because in PowerShell, if you encounter a terminating error that's not wrapped in try-catch, PowerShell actually treats it as non-terminating, and it'll continue to run. Which I think is to help out ad hoc work, but I'm not really sure of the history behind it. It's just one thing that's annoyed me for a long time. And so I have these functions, test 1 and test 2, just to demonstrate how they work, right? And so the difference is it's actually, forgetting the fact of the terminating error, one of the points that I'm trying to make here is the output. And so what you want is how you handle errors influences how users are going to see the errors when they call your stuff. And so in test 1, if I run it, and I go down to the bottom here, so here, forgive the colors. I don't know why the colors are set up this way, but I'll deal with this anyway. So it says the proper error message, attempted to divide by 0. It tells me the actual line for character 5 and gives me this 1 divided by 0. But if I write a function, let me back up. If I write a commandlet, if I write a binary module with commandlets, and I ship it out to all you guys, and you're working on it, and you run that commandlet to go and do something, when the error comes up, it doesn't tell you at line 24, character 7, show you a big chunk of my C# code, here's where the actual error came from. Because it's a black box. It's something I give you to accomplish a task. And when you run it to accomplish that task, do you want to know the inner details of where that error happened? Maybe, if you're the author of that command. Or do you want to know where in your script the error happened, right? I ran test-1. There's no mention of test-1 right here. But I ran a command, and it failed. And it just does, but it doesn't even talk about that. When you run commandlets, binary commandlets, as part of a binary module, and you get errors, they look more like this. So run test 2. This is what we're used to seeing with compiled binary commandlets. The command I ran, the error message, the line and character reference are my code, my script, because I want to know where in my stuff something failed. I don't want to start getting confused with internals of the things I'm calling. I want to see what happened in my code. It then shows me the actual error here. The error is test 2, because it's treating it like a black box. So what you choose to do for error handling, you're going to want to judge based on what your intent is. Your own code, you want the internals. Maybe you don't do the extra handling so that you actually get those internals and you can get to the bottom of the issue faster. Code you're shipping to the community who doesn't care about your internals and they don't want to be confused by them. You just want them to be able to get an error message that tells them they did something wrong, ideally, because ideally you're not dividing 1 by 0 in your code. Then, in that case, you want to give them errors like this, so that when they get an error, it's something more along the lines of they gave an incorrect parameter value, or they forgot to do this thing, and this is the command they were using, and so guides them to the solution faster. So that's why the 2 different approaches are useful. And by the way, I haven't yet copied this up to GitHub, this set of files, but I will after this presentation. So you guys will be able to have access to all these little scripts that I have running here. And the slide deck is, well, slide deck's useless, but but the scripts, you'll be able to have access to the scripts and be able to go through and try them and take a look at them for examples.
I have a question about that.
Yes?
Doesn't, for example, if you ran a piece of Stacktrace, doesn't it show you, doesn't it show you both?
Yes. Right, so in here, the beauty about this approach is if I do want to get into the internals, and I actually have access to that information, I can go in the Stacktrace and still see some of that stuff. So even with this solution, this gives both versus that's just the internal stuff. And so this is why I use this like all the time, even my own stuff. I don't do the other one because I know how to get to the error in my own code. I know how, like when you get this error message back, and the most recent error is in $error 0 because it's a collection. If I do $error, let me, backspace that. Where is it now? Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. So if I, let me just try that. There we go. So it's confused by the lines. Let me scroll this down. OK, so $error, and I can go and look at error number 0. And so there's the error message I received for test 2. Now let me make this so you can see it a bit better. So there's the same error. And I can pipe that to, oh, that's wonderful. Try this again. OK, I'm just going to type it up there anyway. And Visual Studio Code is great, but it is quirky. Pipe that to format list and say, show me all the properties. And I get the same information. Excuse the overlay, but I get the exact same input because of something else I would like to do with PR4 in PowerShell, which is the fact that when you have an object that's an error, either an error record or an exception, and you say, I want a format list and give me all the properties, and Power says, I think you want that, but I really want to give you this instead, and it gives you the same message you had before. And so you can still get it, but you have to use the force. And so when you do that, then I get into, there's a script Stacktrace, which is not great because I'm not using actual script file right now, so it just shows me the script block in memory on line 1. Then I get into line 13 of the test2 command, and so I can peel back the onion and get to the point where my chunk of code failed. This isn't the best representation of it because I'm working with stuff I'm running ad hoc. But yeah, you can actually get into and get that level of detail so that you get more from the second approach than you do from the first. Thank you for asking that question.
Does select star return everything, or do they hide that too?
Select star would, well, that converts, right? So yeah, you can do that. If I do, so that's a great idea. Pipe that to 0 there, and oops. So select all the properties, and so that, yeah, they're generating a new object at that point, but that's another way to get at it, just in terms of fast and typing at the command line to do it. I still think the format stuff should do it, because if I tell format to do something, why is it saying, well, I know better? So yeah. Other questions? Yes?
Those automatic variables, where do you define them? Is it in your profile in every script you want to run, or?
Good question. Thank you. If ever somebody asks a question and I don't repeat the question, it'd be great if you remind me to repeat the question. The people who watch this offline really do appreciate that. So automatic variables, where would you define them is what the question was. I would say wherever you need to. I mean, that's a weird answer, but if it's something that you're using interactively, put it in your profile, sure. If it's something that you're using with a whole bunch of users and you come up with a solution, there's no reason why that automatic variable wouldn't be as part of a module because you're using it in that module, assuming that it had not using global, because global on modules is just not a good thing to do. So there's no reason why you might want to use that inside of a module if there's a real solution. So it really depends on the use case for that. Yes. Other questions? OK, so let's go on. So that's those two. Now, I want to talk for a minute about managed debugging. And so I've got 2 more test functions here. How am I doing on time? OK, got to speed up a little bit. So let me load these, and then I'll talk to them. And so these 2 functions are the exact same, except for 1 line. So test 3 just calls get process for the current process ID, and still uses the same error handling I had. And then test 4 does the same thing, but it has this line on line 38, system.diagnostics.debugger hidden. How many people are aware of and have used the not counting people who have been to my debugger talk last year. How many people are aware of and have used the debugger attributes? So this is one of those things that people just don't know about. We don't talk about it. We don't document it, but it's there. It comes from .NET. .NET has a debugger hidden attribute and also has a debugger step through attribute. And those are used to tell the debugger what to do when something happens. So they're both the same code. Below on line 44 here, it's the exact same as what you see below line 33. So both the exact same code with the exception of a debugger hidden handler on it. And so what that allows me to do, I talk about shims. One of the things that drives me with the work I'm doing is when I write functions in PowerShell, I want them to work as closely as possible to how a commandlet would work. Because I want the same experience for error messages. I also want the same experience for it being a black box. I don't want you to step through my code unless you really want to. I mean, you can if you want to. My code is open source. But I don't, generally speaking, if you're running my stuff, you probably don't want to step through my code. You want to step through your code and figure out what's going on. And so to be respectful of the person who's using my stuff, before I ship a module, I add these attributes, like debugger hidden. And so what's that do? So I've got them loaded into memory. I'm going to set a breakpoint on the command get process. So earlier, when I was doing automatic variables, I set a variable breakpoint. You can also set breakpoints on commands. If you set a breakpoint on a command, the moment that that command is invoked, doesn't matter what scope, doesn't matter how far down the call stack it is, the moment that command is invoked, PowerShell will enter the debugger at that command invocation, which is very useful if you know a certain command is failing. So I talked about what's coming in PowerShell 7 with error action break. But if you also know you're running some big script that goes through several layers, and when you get into the weeds, it actually calls get process, and get process happens to be failing, you can try to get yourself to the error faster by setting a command breakpoint. And so I use those on a regular basis. And so this is going to set a command breakpoint. And so now, if I run test 3, lo and behold, I hit the breakpoint because I don't have any instructions for the debugger in test 3. Test 3 is just an open function. And so when I run it, I hit my breakpoint, and I can step through and actually run the command. And so if I run it, just hit continue, I get back the process information. Now, that opens up a temporary file there. Let me go back here. If I run test 4, I get the same information. It actually did refresh. It didn't look like it did, but it's because it's overlapped right on top of one another. So when I run test 4, I get back the same information. I didn't remove my breakpoint. I didn't disable it. But the PowerShell debugger skipped over my code. And so if I ship a module to community of users, and they're using that module and running scripts and solutions around that, and they're trying to debug, I don't want them to get confused by debugging into my code. And so if you guys find somewhere in your code you've got a problem with get process, and so you set a command breakpoint, I don't want you stopping on mine, because mine should be tested and working, because I shipped it, and I tested it with Pester, and everything's great, and I don't write buggy code. So this is a way to be respectful when you're sharing scripts with the community, so that the community doesn't step through your code in a debugger. It basically just tells the debugger, bugger off. I don't want you to go in here. And so that just allows for more efficient debugging by the person who's using the code. So that's why I use that. I use this all the time, and it's great when because when you're debugging, when you're running the issue, you really want to scope it down to the essentials of where the issue could be happening. Maybe it is happening in my code, in which case, if you install my module debug px, you can actually enable or disable. You can actually turn these those attributes on or off for any command. So you could actually do get command dash module, some module that I have, and then pipe that to the command in debug px to turn off all of the debugger hidden stuff in my module, and then start using breakpoints and go into my module. And then when you're done, turn it back on, or just unload and reload the module, and they'll be there again. So there are ways you can do that. Right now, I'm doing that through some internal stuff. I think those commands should be a PR. But that's the way I'm doing it right now. So, and the reason why, I mean, a lot of this stuff would have been a PR already if PowerShell was open source earlier, but these are solutions that have come up before PowerShell became open source, and so I'm carrying them forward, and eventually a lot of these things will probably find their way into the language at one point or another, so that anybody can just use them without having to download additional stuff. Let's see, so that's some debugger magic. Now I can get out of the debugger here. Let me just close that out. So now let's get into smart parameter handling. So I'm going to load into the function here. This is a really simple one. I mean, it's simple, but people don't necessarily think about it and are not necessarily aware of it, and so I wanted to call it out just so people can understand it. So this is a function that takes parameters from the pipeline. And so the, where are we? Yeah. So the ID parameter of type int takes its value from the pipeline by property name. So if I get an object sent to me down the pipeline, and that object has a property called ID, it's going to grab it and use it inside of it. A lot of people won't do, I mean, I could have broken this out into two additional functions, but I just got one. A lot of people will not do the if-else logic that you see on lines 9 to 13. They won't check and see if they already have a process, and internally they might have to actually have the object do work on that object. But you might already have it. So instead of just doing line 12, which is what you can see in a lot of scripts that are out there for this sort of solution when you're dealing with pipeline by property name, oh, I've got the ID, I'm going to get the process, I can actually do that. This, you can actually pick up the pipeline by using $underbar, which comes from PowerShell version 1 functions. And if you do have the process, you already got it, save yourself some time, get more performance, and then work with the process. And so that's what that does. I'm not going to run the stuff at the bottom. It just demonstrates what I just told you. And so that is smart parameter handling. And then the last thing I'm going to show you, and this one might be great for some side discussions. I know I've got to wrap this up because the doors are open. I'm just going to F5 this. So PowerShell has this thing called command not found action. And I was talking about duck typing earlier. Well, wouldn't it be kind of neat if, I mean, my finger memory, I'm so used to doing verb-noun. My finger memory just does that instantaneously without thinking about it. Wouldn't it be neat if, oh, let me just see this. OK, get process ID $PID. And now let's pipe that to select, no, actually not do ID PID. Let's get all the processes. And I'm going to look at the select dash first 10. So you see what I did there is I'm piping get process to select first, which is not a command. Select first doesn't exist. But we're so used to with the object noun commands, just typing in for each or where or select and not typing in the rest. And instinctively, when I'm typing in, I won't put the space between the alias and the parameter. And so I thought, well, that's annoying. So I created a command not found action that when you run this command, it says, well, select first doesn't exist, but select object does. And select object has a first parameter, so I know what you want. And so I'm going to do it. And so that, oh, get process has a debugger breakpoint on it. So that gives me the first 10. I mean, it's some garbage data, but that's the point is that you can do some really interesting things with command not found handlers to make smart solutions so that PowerShell can, I guess it's a little bit of machine learning or AI, do some thinking for you about what your intent was, and then do the right thing. And that's my talk. Thank you, everybody, for coming.